Welcome to our panel on trustees. I really think it's super interesting for me. I'm Kenneth. I'm the president of APSCUF, which is the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties. We represent the publicly owned universities in Pennsylvania, the faculty and coaches. And you know, I've had so much experience in our system. We have both trustees at each individual university and a board of governors. And the way they get there, my interaction with them has been interesting, especially after talking to our panelists here and seeing their perspectives and how they got there. I'll start off by relaying a story that I often relay, which is we were having a difficult time at my university with our president. We'll just leave it at that. A difficult time. So we decided we were going to go to the Council of Trustees meeting to show some force and say these are our concerns. And we got a lot of faculty who came. Sitting next to me was a physicist who didn't ordinarily get involved with things but wanted to support us. And after a while of listening to things, he leaned over and whispered in my ear, "I think I took too much medication this morning." And I said, what are you talking about? He's like, well, this seems, it's a little bit like our university, but the conversation doesn't seem to have anything at all to do with the reality of what's going on there. And, that's kind of like I think a feeling that's shared by a lot of faculty, especially about the trustees, that they're operating on a kind of a different level than the university. So after talking with you guys, I have a very different perspective about how it could be otherwise. So let me introduce our guests. I'm going to introduce them and then ask them, after I introduce them, to talk a little bit about themselves and how they got in their positions. So directly to my right is Susan Solomon, who is a trustee at the City College of San Francisco. Then there is Todd Regis, who's at the University of Michigan as a regent.
Central.
I'm at
Central. Sorry, it was wrong in my. And Paul Brown, who's at the University of Michigan as a trustee. So, Susan, do you want to start off?
Sure. I started as a preschool teacher, became a kindergarten teacher. I graduated to kindergarten, and spent a career teaching and then becoming involved in my union, which is United Educators of San Francisco, and was secretary, then executive vice president, and then president of the local. And eventually I was lead negotiator in bargaining. I retired in 2021, not knowing exactly what I was going to do next. There were rumors that I was going to get a job with AFT or CFT, which was not true, and also rumors that I was going to run for office, which I thought was not true. And then I was actually recruited to run for the Board of Trustees, and by a couple of the unions, faculty and classified unions. I ran with a couple of other members, of a couple of other candidates, and we are all now on the Board of Trustees. And I've been on for a little over a year. And it's actually been a very interesting, a really great experience. And the main thing that I want to say about City College of San Francisco is how many people in San Francisco love their community college. And I have done, over the years, many decades of political campaigning, more than I can believe, actually, starting as a teenager. And nothing resonated with voters as I campaigned the way that City College did. I even had experiences where I would, you've probably all done some kind of, where you have to reach out to strangers and you hope they don't reject you. Or, okay, I'm projecting. I hope they don't reject me. And there would be people who would walk by me as I held my sign and a brochure, and they'd hear me say the word City College and come back. And so the importance of keeping this college a community college, and the jewel of San Francisco, as it's sometimes called, is what keeps me going when times get rough. Thank you.
I'm Todd Regis. I sit on Central Michigan University's board. I was appointed by the governor just over a year ago to that board, and in November I was elected by my other 7 cohorts as the chair of that board, so I currently serve as the chair. My unique perspective is I am a 4th generation labor union. All my grandparents, grandfathers, all of them were members of unions. Both my great-grandparents were mine workers. My grandfather, as he likes to say, he got pushed out of a plane on D-Day. He says he's just glad the heavy equipment went first, that he had to drive behind the lines. And then when he came back, he was operating engineer, helped build I-94, which is the main thoroughfare we used from Ann Arbor to most of the west side of the state in Michigan, for those that are familiar with it. And my other grandfather was a paper worker. My father was an auto worker, and I became a union member when I was 16 of the United Food and Commercial Workers Labor Union when I started bagging groceries at a grocery store because I was the oldest child and told if I was going to college, how are you going to pay for it? Because my parents had never gone. So I am a first gen. And I knew that that was important. I also knew that I had 4 siblings that needed to see, hey, this is an option. So that's where I fall into that. After graduating from college, I started working for the local. I currently serve as one of the 3 statewide officers of the largest private sector local in the state. We have 32,000 members in the state of Michigan, where I serve as that, and I've done the legislative political stuff forever at that local, and I am there till July 5th when I will take an early retirement from that position. So,
Paul Brown. I'm a Board of Regent at the University of Michigan. I am from Northern Michigan, which is unique on the board. But board members, there are 8 members on the board, 2 up for election every 2 years and a statewide election. I come from a very political family, all Upers. My grandfather was a congressman and U.S. senator, a New Dealer 100 years ago. My mom grew up in Western Ohio and Pennsylvania, and first was at IGA, was her first union, and she really credits it for, getting her through college to be able to pay for it. And then when I was growing up, she was a Teamster. I joined the Seafarers Union at about 16, I think was my first job. I don't know if I was a full member at that point. I worked the freight boats going to Mackinac Island in northern Michigan. Those were my summer jobs. It was a longshoreman and seafarers company union. And I had worked in New York for a while after school, and then went back to the state of Michigan. I was recruited back by the then Governor Jennifer Granholm during the depths of the Great Recession. And obviously Michigan was hit harder than most states. And looking around at kind of the economic development potential of the states, we had a lot of peer comparisons, and those states that were doing better were the ones that really relied on research institutions to drive innovation in the local economies. And so I thought I had kind of a life view that tithing to good causes was something I believed in, and since I didn't have much money, my time was more valuable than any money I could give. So I said I always gave 10% of my time, and I thought, all right, if I'm going to give 10% of my time, where could it be the most impactful? And when I looked around the landscape at University of Michigan in particular, where we're one of the largest, if not the largest employer in the state. During the recession, we were the largest employer in the state. GM may have leapfrogged us slightly. Hospital systems, so cost and access to healthcare, cost and access to education, gender equality and climate change, yet you have a board that made up of 8 members that makes all of those decisions, as opposed to a legislative process of potentially hundreds. And I just thought that's where it could be the most impactful. And so statewide election, we are nominated at our convention. Luckily, labor dominates our convention, and then at that point, you're just hoping to ride the coattails of the top of the ticket.
So maybe we can go a little bit more into this in terms of how you got the position. And not just how you got the position, but also how do you think it impacts how what you view as like your constituency, the people you have to answer to when you are serving on the board. And I really do think it makes a difference. Susan?
Should we start now? Yeah. So I first want to say I want to make sure people know I'm part of the illustrious club of being the granddaughter, the daughter, the niece of union people, including the International Longshore and Warehouse Union and spouse. So seafarer is part of that. So to directly answer my constituents, because, and to give a little more detail, in San Francisco there are 7 elected trustees on the Board of Trustees, and it's a citywide election, not by district. So I really believe that my constituents are the voters who voted for me, to the extent that I understand why they voted for me, and the people who supported my running, and that was largely labor and other, so unions, the Central Labor Council, the faculty and staff unions, and then certainly looking at students, coming from education, albeit much younger students, everything really ultimately has to be centered on students. So if we can work on policies and budgets that center on students, that really has to be our main constituents. Because I'm really interested in hearing more about appointed trustees, because what the difference is there, who do you answer to, who are your constituents? And we get pretty frequent feedback from various constituents about how we're doing.
That's interesting, because as an appointed one, you really, the governor puts you there. So you're appointed, and I'm going to talk about a unique perspective for me. Central Michigan is not where I went to school. I went to Western Michigan. If you know anything about the two, they're natural rivals. So when the appointments division, and this is my 7th gubernatorial appointment in my lifetime, been appointed by Dems, Republicans, and Dems, various ones, including I am the only labor person to ever serve on the Agriculture Commission in Michigan, which, by the way, you can't organize farm workers. So they were all afraid I was there to change that. I actually chaired it. I never organized a single one of their farm workers, but I grew up on farm. So I knew the industry, and I was a natural appointment for that. So in this group, the governor appoints me. I don't know any of the alums. I don't know anybody. When they asked me about the appointments division, I said, "You realize that was a WMU, not a CMU," in front of my, my degree. And they laughed and said, "Yes, they did." And I said, "Is the reason my own alma mater?" Well, there had been a couple people that had been, because you have to be confirmed by the Senate. The state Senate has to confirm once a governor appoints, and it's very common that there's rejections and stuff depending on the political nature. So in this case, because of what I do for a living, I knew everybody on both sides. There wasn't a problem with getting appointed or getting past the Senate approval on my part, but it was rather interesting, the calls, as soon as my name got announced, the call from Mount Pleasant to Kalamazoo saying, "Who is this guy and why is he on our board?" And then the same thing with my colleagues, because half of them went to school there. And then the comments that were in the newspaper, like, "Oh, why is the guy from Western on our board?" They've never had one before. And then, the alumni, I heard from the alumni. The students were fine. The faculty was great, and I'll tell you why, because one of the things, I feel like they're part of the constituency immediately. Now, for me, it was unique because I sit on all the AFL-CIO boards. I knew the AFT and the MEA people, so I said to them, "Look, if I'm going to be on that board, I want to meet your people. I need to know what's going on campus." And I actually, to the point where when I met them before I ever showed up on campus, I actually have the lapel pins on. I have an AFT and an MEA lapel pin. I wear those to every meeting because, and if you look at my official photo, which I think is the one they put on the line, I have them on my lapel pin. And when I had my photo taken, there was somebody from the administration came over and asked me if they wanted to hold my pins. And I said, "No, I don't." Because just because I'm on your board doesn't mean I lose what I've done my entire life, and what I believe in. So.
I think that's well said, and that's kind of my perspective. I came to the board. I was very involved in Democratic politics my whole life, from a little kid, knocking doors and putting out flyers, all the way to working for elected officials. I was teaching at the University of Michigan, just a single class as a lecturer, and so I was a Leo member, Leo AFT member, and very involved in a previous contract negotiation before the next space, so to speak, opened up to run on the board. So that was my specific track to get on. But in terms of who do I consider my constituencies, well, one, who I was, I felt that the board at that time consisted of no one lived more than, I think, 30 miles, maybe it was 50 miles from the university at that time. And even though I was living in Ann Arbor at that time, I really considered myself a small town, northern Michigan person. Taxpayers in the UP have been paying taxes for that school since its founding also. So I felt that is one very clear perspective, I would call it, that I bring to the board. And then the other perspective was as a lifelong union member. And so those are my perspectives, which I can never leave behind. But who do I represent? It's obviously everyone in the state of Michigan, and I think there is a distinction. We've been lucky to have some very good governors in the state who do not, from what I have seen, get involved with the boards that appoint them. But there is talk around the state of Michigan right now to change the three, Michigan State, and Wayne State are 3 of the 15, or there are 3 plus 15, I forget,
Yep.
that
No,
are
15.
3 of the 15 that are statewide elected. And I'm very much opposed to that as major research institutions where academic independence is absolutely critical. I think having a citizen-voted board is really, really valuable. I mean, you just see what's happened in Florida. As soon as your school gets a reputation of having political influence in the academic independence process, you're toast. All the greatest professors will just leave. They'll never want to go there. But in terms of who do I think about in terms of my constituency, obviously it's everyone in the state of Michigan, but it's more the University of Michigan is my constituency, because in some ways what's good for the University of Michigan is good for the people and the citizens of Michigan. And sometimes you'll have a short term or one group that you may make a decision for that is not great for them, but it's what's best for the university, and in the long run that's what's most important for all of the constituencies. So that's always the tension.
So I alluded to it just at the beginning, and I think it also came up earlier in the conference when we had some presidents and the chancellor here when they were talking about their boards, that there was some concern that the boards don't really keep up with what's going on at the university, that they're not really knowledgeable about it. And present company aside, of course, I'm wondering if you could just talk a little bit about your board that you serve on and whether you feel that they really keep up with what's going on at the university.
I really admire my colleagues and how they're able to keep up. And it's a pretty tall order, I think. Some of the other trustees on the board were already affiliated with City College in one way or another, including the incumbents who are on the board, because it's a 7-member board, but the terms are staggered. So one of the things that I suspected before I got elected by watching the Board of Education work and our City Council and Board of Trustees is how much preparation it takes to go to those monthly meetings, the hundreds of pages that you have of documents that you have to read. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is getting to know campus life and to the point earlier made, finding out what it's like for the people, the workers, the people who do the work on the campus. So definitely meeting with their representative unions, representatives from their unions to find out, and then making sure that we ask a lot of questions. I think our meetings are extremely, extremely long. It's really doing a second shift, getting home sometimes in the middle of the night. And it's, I know some people are puzzled or aggravated about why are our meetings so long. And part of it is that we're trying to get the information we need so we can make the decisions that have to be made and not walk in blind and not, there are sometimes, I would say, accusations of boards that they rubber stamp whatever is presented to them. So making sure that that's not what we're doing ends up taking time.
So when I joined the board, I'm somebody that asks lots of questions. I want to learn. So I ask questions about everything. I started asking about this school and that school, and I realized that administratively they want to keep me here in a box. That's not what I feel. If I'm going to be on this board, I have some obligations to know what's going on campus. So I started asking some of my colleagues, and I realized that a couple of them also feel like we're in boxes to some degree. So we started asking lots of questions, and we started getting answers. We started going out and talking to students. My first graduation, when I'm supposed to give a speech, they're run around trying to find me. Well, I'm out talking to students that are graduating and finding out what their experience was. And later they caught me talking to the maintenance guys who are standing there because they've just fixed the stuff. They're all union members, okay? I represent union members. I understand what HVAC is because I represent these guys. So I'm talking about their wages, I'm talking about the equipment they're using and what they're running on the roof. And they're like, what are you doing talking to those guys? And I'm like, well, they're employees of the university too, right? That's my perspective. I've taken it now that I am the chair, as I committed to my colleagues, we're all going to learn about the campus. So our campus is a rectangle. North end is the city, south end is football stadium, east end is the main road, and the west side are cornfields. You can't get lost in a 2-mile rectangle.
Oh, I could.
You just can't. It's not like most. So we actually have started every meeting that we have 2-day meetings. We have a 90-minute, at least 90, it's actually turned into 120 minutes. We visit one of the different schools on campus. The dean hosts us. We go and we want to see things. I had no idea. We have a board game program at Central Michigan. I had no idea. We make dice, we make board games, we sell them. We make money. Had no idea. None of my colleagues did either. Okay, that's how we are learning about some of the programs. We have a drone, we were talking about this, we have a drone certification. We're out by the cornfields and there's all these drones flying around. Well, they're being used in the military, they're being used by Department of Defense money and all this. We had no idea. We built a sub on our campus. I had no idea we had a sub on our campus. We're exploring the Great Lakes with a sub up by Beaver Island. By doing this is what we did. Now the other perspective that we've done, I started the first meeting, first night we spend the night, we have dinner with a different group. So I had dinner with the deans. I did not invite the provost, I did not invite the president. I got lobbied, hey, the provost said, those are my deans. I said, okay, thank you, appreciate that. The president said, but I'm an ex-officio of the board. I said, we're not making any board decisions, we're just having dinner. It gave us the opportunity to sit with all the deans of the college and for the board to have perspective of hear what's going on, what their programs are, what's good, what's bad. We had perspective. Guess what? No chaos afterwards either. No major issues. It was an opportunity for us to mingle with them. In April, we do it with the cabinet members, and we'll do it with the cabinet members. This time, we're inviting the provost and president for that one. But I mean, that's the perspective I have. That's how, in a way, we're going to learn what's going on.
Yeah, I brought up a bunch of topics there. First of all, the diligence of individual board members. I sit on a lot of boards, public, private, big, small, and it's the same with all boards. You have some members that are very, very diligent on every topic. You have some members that are, diligent on a couple of topics that they're particularly interested in. That's neither of those models are particularly bad or good. They have their pros and cons. You may have noticed our university had a very bad doctor scandal in the athletic department, and so it was a major tort case, personal injury case. We have 3 personal injury attorneys on the board. That came in real handy in terms to understand. They knew it better than anybody else. Obviously construction is a major issue. We have a very big developer on our board. We have major sports in our program. We have one who's owns the 2 of the 3 or 4 professional teams in Detroit. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing when you have members that really focus on the things that matter to them. And when we have that issue, we often say, okay, so-and-so, what's your perspective on this? I really need to learn and understand, and I'll probably give a lot of deference to you on that decision. But it runs the spectrum, because again, we are, as I say, we're the largest employer in the state, over 70,000 employees, similar number of students. We have 3 very distinct campuses in almost every way. When you think about it, we have the 2nd largest hospital system in the state, stretches most of the geography of the state in one way or another. We have what could be considered a couple of professional sports teams in terms of scale and budget. We run a dozen hotels in the form of dorms and twice as many restaurants in the form of cafeterias. We have power plants. And so for anybody, whether it's the president, provost, or even deans within their own school, it's almost, if not totally impossible to ever have your hands around everything. So, reliant on great staff and faculty, which we have, and reliant on fellow board members to kind of, specialize is not such a bad thing.
I'm glad you brought that up, actually, because certainly, for example, I rely on the members of the trustees who have been doing work around student success and policy. And I neglected, which I feel badly about, to mention we have a student trustee as well, who's elected by their peer at the school site, at the college, and their perspectives are invaluable. And so I certainly get advice from people, and then sometimes do a lot of listening, not just talking.
The last thing that you touched on was kind of how in the weeds does your administration want you to be?
Yeah.
And that is
I was going to ask you about really, because a lot of the feedback I get sometimes when I speak to boards, trustees, is, well, it's not. We can't micromanage the university. So I'm just wondering, how do you work that balance where you want to be active, you want to give your perspective, but there is some pushback, I would imagine, that, it's the president's job to run the university.
Yeah, and that's true, it is. But we have a fiduciary responsibility, and we take it very, very seriously. Some of the smaller institutions that I sit on the board of, everybody could fit around one table in the whole institution. So as a board member, everybody really, really well. That's impossible at a large institution, and so trying to get that type of information exchange process doesn't work in a giant university, but you still need to potentially have that access if you want to drill down. And again, that's, I think, not dissimilar from the university setting to any others. I've been in big companies where the administration, they don't want the board in their shorts either. And I've been on that side in big, when I was in state government, we had a board and we considered them mostly dilettantes. Not really, they were great people who really cared. But we were like, look, just stop asking me so many questions. I gotta get, I gotta do my job here. I got this. So it's a natural tension where we really run into headbutting is where you go to the administration and say, I want to know, I need to talk to so-and-so, I really want to understand this better, and they try to prevent it. That, when you really ask and they try to put up roadblocks, I had a situation where there was a major property development we were going to do in the form of dorms. Had issues trying to get information up to that point. A year ahead of when the final approval was supposed to happen, I said, look, I still need to find out about these few things. Can you come back and set up a time, whatever convenient to you, to the specific person in the institution that kind of had this information? He was one layer down. Can you come, anytime it's convenient for you before a year from now, I really want to get my hands around this to make sure we're doing this right. Yeah. A year later comes up, nothing. We kill the project. Let's kill the project, or try to say, I'm not saying yes because I still haven't gotten this information. It's unacceptable. Mm-hmm. And the person obviously felt really bad that I had required that of. Came up to me after, forwarded an email from a president who was no longer with us, not in the physical sense, but in the job sense. An email from the president to him. He had reached out to the president and say, Regent Brown wants to know about this information, anything, I'm going to set up that meeting. He said, no, don't. Ignore that. I mean, that's shocking.
Yeah.
And you get those personalities. And he sent me the email. I read it word for word. It was shocking.
Anything you'd like to add, Susan?
We definitely have some of those tensions where, and the way it's framed is policy versus operations. And I have really no interest in micromanaging City College. I would hardly know where to start. And there's enough work to do without doing that. But I really do think also it's sometimes a matter of interpreting what is policy and what is operations. And so we've passed resolutions that with an expectation that the chancellor will then implement them. We're not going to implement them. They don't always get implemented. And so that's where the tension can be. And again, not wanting just to say whatever comes our way is we're just going to say yes. And and I think one of the biggest challenges, of course, is the budget, and not having, really we could solve a lot of problems by funding public education so much better than it's funded. Our meetings would be so much shorter if we didn't have to talk about how to divide up a pie that's too small. But I sometimes the questions that I ask, I don't get clear answers, or they are not clear to me. I don't speak budget. I'm starting to. And I do look for support, and I get it from the unions, the faculty union in particular. They have people who specialize in analyzing the budget. They get support from the state so that I can understand what I'm looking at, and again, ask the right questions and make the right decisions. I couldn't do that without that support. I credit them with making me look smart at the meetings because a part of that is they have a really strong vested interest in having a good, a healthy budget and keeping the school going. And so they will be creative in how they look at a budget and come up with solutions to problems.
I think for our board, it's a little unique because we're in a small town, Mount Pleasant, Michigan, and many of the board members, previous board members in the history since 1964, majority of them have a tie to that town. Either lived there, grew up there, or whatever. That's how most of the appointments were made in the past. So there's always interest. Everybody knows somebody or knew somebody that's on the board. There's a lot of former board members that are still around that give their perspectives too. So you hear lots of stuff, but you've got to sort through what you hear in facts. And in order to do that, you've got to have a conversation with the administration. You've got to have a conversation with the people that are running the place, the cabinet members and stuff. And one of the hard parts there is if there's a roadblock, it wasn't hard to figure out when you started asking questions. One of the first things, we're doing an orientation, they say, hey, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I want to meet your legislative person. I run around the Capitol for 30 plus years of my life. I don't know your legislative person. I know the legislative person for most of the other universities. I don't know yours. I want to meet him or her or whoever it is. And I did, and we had great conversation, and I learned some perspective there. But it wasn't hard for me to realize that you know what, there's a box again, right? They want certain things being said to the trustee and stuff, and it wasn't hard to realize that and say, you know, we're not going to play that game. That's not how I am. That's not how we're going to do it. And, you know, most of the board has been very clear that we are going to ask questions. We're not there to run it. I'm not there to sit there and figure out what needs to be paid today, what doesn't need to be paid, or what policy needs to happen on a daily basis. But we certainly are responsible for that university. When, you know, we're a university that's lost over half the students in 12 years. We have started an increase, you know, with enrollment. They went from 28.5 down to about 14.4. Paul and I were talking earlier, we have a set of dorms that are empty right now.
Oh.
So what happens? Well, you have to worry about staff. You have to worry about all sorts of stuff, right? I mean, for me, look, I worry about that. I mean, that's what I do for a living. I worry about everybody. Where are they going? What's happening with the university? So a lot of questions get asked. And, you know, you also have opportunities to make changes sometimes. And in this case, you know, in October or September, I was assigned with the former chair, immediate past chair, to be on the bargaining committee of the president's new contract. So, which was a unique perspective, right? All of a sudden, you know, look, I negotiate contracts for a living. Okay, I'm like, this is gonna be fun. What do we do? Well, it's nothing like you negotiate a contract, right? And there was an automatic 3-year renewal every year. And, you know, salaries at a presidential level can be a little extreme sometimes, or at least in my eyes. I mean, I'm not negotiating contracts like this on a daily basis.
Try a football contract.
Oh, yeah, right? Yeah.
Oh, my.
So as you look at those, and you're like, okay, and then as we get closer, president makes a decision that doesn't want to, going to leave. So then it becomes a final contract. And then the perspective of that. And then as you put my signatures on the final contract of the president, because he's president through the end of this year. So now I have a presidential search we're doing, right? So we have an opportunity to make a change. So I ask, hey, how'd you do president searches in the past? Can I see who was on them? Well, I get handed 11, 12, 13 people. Majority of them are all the same people. I'll say it, mostly white, male, and pale. That's what the people were that were searching for a president. And my comment as chair, privately and publicly, was we're going to do it different. We're going to have a larger board, and it's going to look like our campus. Because when I walk on our campus, I don't see white male. I see less white males. I see a lot of color. I hear a lot of language. I hear languages I don't speak. And we're going to have a perspective there. And guess what? It's more female than male on our campus, about 60-40. So for the first time ever, I'm very happy to say we just announced last Friday, our board search has 20 members, 11 females, 9 males. Now, some of those are mandated. Most men aren't mandated. But I also have color. I have 5 faculty members out of those 20. I have someone representing unions, the office professionals. I have a different perspective on that board. So now, this is more broad I know it's more beyond what you asked, but that's how you make change. You make change by being part of it and having others help you make those change. You can't do it as a one person. You've got to do it as a group. And I had full board support as we made that, because our board has to vote and approve that.
So you brought up negotiations in a roundabout way, and I think everybody's dying to know about when it comes to boards. You know, what is, in your perspective, the proper role of the board during a contract negotiation? How involved can they be? What kinds of conversations occur, you know, among board members during the negotiation? And feel free to share some dirt if you want to.
I'll give it a try, because we did something different that, to my knowledge, had not been done before. So the smaller unions had settled their contracts, so the building trades and crafts, but the faculty union and the classified staff union contracts had been going on, the negotiations had been going on for months and months, and nothing was happening. Nothing was happening at the bargaining tables. Strike votes were taken in both unions and got a very high vote of yes. So we would talk in great detail in closed session about negotiations. I was frustrated on a number of occasions when we felt that the Board of Trustees had given clear instructions for the bargaining team, and then we would find out that the message didn't get delivered. So one idea that we came up with was we had not gone to impasse officially, but what about the idea of bringing in a mediator on a voluntary basis? And this was the faculty union, with just seeing if we could break through and move forward somehow. So I'll back up a little and say, when I was an officer in the pre-K 12th grade educator union, we met regularly with members of the Board of Education. And I really appreciated the ones who made the time, so they could hear our perspective on things that were happening. We could find out theirs, and I knew from that they knew almost nothing about negotiations when I was on that side of the table. And so meeting with the unions and finding out some of their perspectives was helpful. And then we discussed this idea of bringing in a mediator. And I recommended somebody I had worked with several times over my 20 plus years with United Educators of San Francisco. I trusted him. I thought he was good at the job and very effective. And it turns out General Counsel for City College had also worked with him, and she thought he did a great job. So we had that buy-in, and so we, through the chancellor, recommended to the faculty union that we bring in a mediator, and they agreed. They wanted trustees to be there. Obviously not more than a quorum, because that's a violation of law, but we ended up, it was all on Zoom, but I sat through, it took 3 days, 3 days all day of working with the mediator. Another trustee was there. All the trustees were, we had check-ins so we could all hear what was going on, and we got a settlement. And I want to say one of the things that I think was very valuable about this is if you haven't been at a bargaining table, it is so hard to understand and imagine what it's really like. So my husband was with the International Longshore and Warehouse Union for many, many years, and he was doing bargaining at multiple, it was private sector, multiple tables for years before I did any of that work. And he would come home from bargaining all day long, leave early in the morning, come home late at night, and I'd say, so what happened today? And he would say, nothing. And I would think, well, obviously he's tired. I'm not going to bug him. He's been talking about it all day. And then I got on the bargaining team for UESF, and after several months of that, I said, I'm sorry, Fred. I just didn't understand. And so the value to me of trustees actually seeing what bargaining is like is really important. And I think it's part of what got us to the finish line. And so we weren't doing the active bargaining. We were, there were times that we were we spoke up. But I think it is really something worth trying, especially when nothing is happening. Nothing positive is happening.
So how did the president react to the activity of the trustees on the?
So this was really interesting, and at City College we have a chancellor, and we at different points, and particularly other trustees, really were encouraging him to show up to bargaining, and he didn't. I mean, and I will say from my experience with the pre-K 12th grade school district, we never saw the superintendent at the bargaining table except to say hello at the beginning and congratulations at the end. So I wasn't surprised that the chancellor wasn't coming, but when we met with the mediator, he came to he was there the whole time. And he did a lot of the lead, which he hadn't done before. I can't tell you for certain that he was there because we were there, but if that's how it worked, I think it was good. I think it was good to have him there so he could also be face to face with the people from the union. And the other thing I want to say about this I think is so important is, and some of this came up at panels yesterday and the day before, it's so part of what I think we need to know as trustees is how much it matters to the workers, to the people doing the work, that it's a matter of respect. Of course, it's also about working conditions and money, and they hadn't had a raise in several years, so that was obviously very important. But to feel that they're being respected in the work that they do, and for us to understand that the people who know the work best are the people who do the work. And some of that came through by getting more involved.
At least at our institution, structurally, everything conspires against working efficiently and well to get a contract done. And so, I mean, everything. And so, in the sense that our vice president of the board, which is an administrative position, when we were just trying to find out information about anything in the institution, and this, my wife rolls her eyes as she should. She's like, look, you got to understand, when you go deep into the organization, it's like, you just want to walk into someone's office and say, yeah, tell me what you're doing, and I want to have a discussion about this. Like, it's like a Pope visit. And so there's this sense that, like, I got to be careful what I say to this person, and which sounds so ridiculous to me. But I get it. Oh boy, here comes a board member. What can I say? What shouldn't I say? What am I going to get kicked by my superior for saying when I shouldn't have said it that way? So the information flow is bad. And then you have board members with distinct perspectives and maybe constituencies, you might say. And so there's a preconceived notion like, oh my gosh, they're just a management person or they're just a labor person. And they're just going to advocate for that side out of knee-jerk reaction. And then for us, we have a budget that previously, and we're getting a little better at this, that we would get presented to us in late spring for a end of June board approval process, which when you have a $12+ billion budget, that makes it very hard to get to know anything about it. And then you have a budget cycle. Let's take the hospital system. Blue Cross pays about 70 to 80% of our revenue comes through Blue Cross in the state. That's negotiated on a 3+ year reimbursement contract, and then we have labor contracts that come up in between that. So if Blue Cross locks you in at a 3% a year increase in your hospital revenue, but the nurses come up during an inflationary period and they want 7%, now all of a sudden the math doesn't work. And then you give nurses 7%, which you only have 3% to really give away in your total budget. Who's that coming from? It's a perfect robbing Peter to pay Paul budget. Perfect in our sense. Other than maybe football coaches that get paid $1 zillion, there's no leakage to shareholders. And so I have this crazy idea that you talked about we need to increase the size of the pie. It's really a pie. And so if we could line up contract negotiations simultaneously to get everyone around the table to say, okay, people, here's how much we have to divvy up. And everybody's around the table that's getting it. And there's this notion of, all right, we need to make a profit to keep our share price up. You don't have that. You want to keep a margin for a buffer, but it doesn't work that way. So you're constantly in the negotiating from the administrator's side. In your mind, you're saying, I'd love to give you all of our surplus, but then I'm not going to have anything to give the union that comes up in a year from now. In the University of Michigan, also you have this sense. The University of Michigan, we passed 3 years ago, maybe more, a policy which is a very pro-organizing policy. We call it neutrality on organizing. And so we have had many new new groups organize. And the administration will push back, say we don't want to recognize that group because it's not rational, which is the term used in the policy. Is that something we get involved in? Well, that seems more policy, and so maybe. But then you have a labor group call you and say, we want X% raise, they're not giving it to us at the table. Should you get involved in that? I have my own personal standards on when I do get involved or not. But it's a really almost impossible position set up from all these structural impediments to get a good process. And I think the main one is just this calendar by which contract negotiations come up and how that relates to each other, how that relates to the revenue side and the timing of that, and the budget cycle. It's totally broken, and it makes it almost impossible to do a real rational budget and contract. I don't know where everyone else sits on that, but
Paul mentioned the policy, 2020 is when you did
2020,
it. I have the policy that he's talking about
It's
because
fabulous.
here's my dream. Because the other two universities where the trustees are, let's see, Board of Governors, Board of Regents,
and
Board of
trustees.
Trustees.
They're all the same thing,
they're all-
just three
but
different names.
West, Michigan State and Wayne State followed their example. They've adopted the same policy, but they were all Democratic controlled. So for the first time ever in the history of our state, where I sit at Central Michigan, our governor gets to appoint 2 more trustees this year. That will be the first time ever since 1964 that there will be Democratic controlled board or more Dems appointed. So you hope it's Democratic. My dream is that we implement the same policy. Basically, it's a card check agreement that, look, majority of the group of employees, they get it, we'll recognize it. I look forward to hopefully seeing that and encouraging the other schools to do the same because I think it's a great piece. Now, here's a unique perspective on negotiations. So the faculty at Central Michigan are up this year. The chair of the board is a union guy. Wears their pins, walked picket lines. My first picket line, I was 4 years old. My dad was at UAW General Motors. He was on strike. Picture of me and my brother holding the sign next to a burn barrel. So that was my first one. What am I going to do? I strongly encourage that we give them every dollar we can, right? But we also have a budget process. We have to figure out how do we pay the rest of the bills on campus. So it's a unique perspective, but I've also taken the perspective. I've actually met with the labor unions, met with them all. As a trustee, as a chair, they're my people. This is what I do for a living. Why would I avoid them? I mean, that's not what my goal is. Now, I've also told them, look, I'm not here to negotiate your contract for you.
You have to-
Okay? I can't negotiate your contract for you.
You can't be engaging in direct dealing.
Exactly.
Right.
I can't. I will listen to you. I will enjoy coffee with you. I will help where I can. But I can't negotiate your contract. But I also have publicly stated this before. If there's ever a picket line, and there's a picket line going on a board meeting, I'm not crossing it. Never crossed one in my life. Won't be crossing one now. Not a step that I'm going to take in my life. So that perspective has led to the president of the university is like, hey, I got a labor union guy on my board. What do I do? Well, it's led to some rather unique conversations. Every article about every strike, thank you, California, for what you did out there. That led to a lot of conversation about how do we avoid that at our university, right? Because that's a conversation you got to have. And thank you, Sean O'Brien, Sean Fain, Sarah Nelson, the national leaders who went out there and said 40% and go on strike, and we need 32-hour work weeks and things like that, because guess what? It's increased perspective. Now, by the way, as we were bargaining our contract, now what you want to hear is you're getting ready to bargain 32,000 people for our contract because, you can't have grocery store workers working 32 hours a week because there's not enough of them to work 40 sometimes, right? And we all have to eat. So that has affected those conversations with the president with, normally they see a 2 to 3% increase. Well, guess what? People are expecting double-digit increases now after COVID and after everything else
Right.
that has happened, and what's gone on in our country with the Screen Actors Guild and everybody else walking picket lines. What do we have to do? And it's allowed the president, myself, to have great conversation about things that, quite frankly, I'm not so sure we're at the top of his morning conversations in most cases. Because we have, in my perspective, we've got to do what's best for the university. We have a type. I don't have 12 mil or 12 bill. I don't have anything like that. Whatever. I don't have that kind of budget.
Yeah.
But how do I get to what we can
Easier.
with what we have, and how do we take care of the employees? Because quite frankly, without the faculty, without all the other unions, what do we have? We don't have a product that students want to come for. So we have to keep that in mind too.
I've seen it go the other way too, as a board that's dominated by Democrats. I've seen a couple of contracts get done that we advocate for, like, look, they deserve, this is going to be a tough negotiation for you. We're coming out of COVID, especially at the hospital, inflation. Buckle up. This is, you're going to have to open the wallet. And then they do it to the point where I'm like, ooh, that may be a little, that's maybe not healthy for the institution. And I fear a little bit that they do it, that they did that just because they know they got a board and they want to make them happy, and this would make them happy if they settled at a number that was maybe more than is appropriate for the health of the institution. But at least in our institution, there's also this notion of you have a bunch of, it's academia, most of them are voting Democratic, sorry to be political, and so they talk the talk, but it's the limousine liberal thing a little bit. They're very uncomfortable with especially, at the Ann Arbor campus, and when push comes to shove, they don't talk. They're uncomfortable with the notion of labor and having a represented group sometimes, where the faculty at Flint for the first time is trying to organize. And it's funny when that's really the rubber's meeting the road, the real underlying biases come out. Like, this is obviously going to cost us more than we can pay, and we're going to lose control. All the old tropes of anti-union stuff. And I said, that's just, it's execution. It's not. That's what really matters, and what you should be thinking about is how you're going to execute in this new model.
Yeah.
So I have one more question before we open it up for questions from the attendees here. And that is just to ask you to reflect on kind of what's been happening in some states as far as political appointees to boards, then boards interfering in places where kind of the opposite way, interfering in, going into curriculum and things like that,
Yeah.
and what your perspectives are on that.
I'll go for that. You have two extremes. You have Rutgers, where the governor, from what I understand, intervened for a very large contract. I don't know the details if it was large or not, but from what I've heard, that's going to put the institution in real financial jeopardy and inability to grow in the places where it should be able to put resources to be successful long term. Just as bad from one area as we have in Florida, where the administration, politics are getting involved. And I think it's horrible for an institution, and it's destructive. And we have the best higher education system in the world, and politics will just ruin it. In many ways, as a statewide elected board, I think that's the best model. I have never gotten a call from a governor to say, I want to do, you need to be doing this, and don't forget I appointed you. And I just think that's, the motivation is there for a politician trying to make a name for themselves to do that and use the institution as basically a bully pulpit, which is inappropriate.
I'd echo a similar thing. I think that it's not our place. It's not appropriate for a governor to step in and do that. Thank God we're not in that boat. The woman from Michigan doesn't believe in that right now, and I don't think any of the people that you and I both are familiar with, most of the last 5 or 6 of them, that's not the perspective that the governors did in Michigan, and hopefully will continue to keep that politics out of our higher ed.
What was brought to my mind when you asked that question was somewhat different, but I feel it's related, and that is in San Francisco we've seen recalls of elected folks. So far not at the Board of Trustees. Every once in a while I do worry that could end up happening, but in a couple of years ago, 3 school board members, so again, pre-K to 12th grade, school board members and the district attorney, who had all been elected, were recalled. And it was very politicized, a very political situation. And between those 4 recalls and then that created vacancies, and then in another situation, a city council member who went to the state assembly, the mayor of San Francisco had 7 appointees in elected positions. And that was a direct result, 4 of those were a direct result of these recalls. And I feel that, and as I'm sure people have heard, in San Francisco, Republicans are virtually never in office, but the fights between moderate and progressive Democrats are fierce. And so some of that's just labels, right? But this is coming from more moderate perspectives that are highly politicized and are have a lot of money. I mean, the campaigns were largely successful because of how much they were able to campaign and how negative the messaging was about people who essentially, I don't know that they were going out of their lane as members of the Board of Education. I didn't agree with them all of the time, but I believe they were trying to address real concerns. And unfortunately got reduced and oversimplified as to what they were talking about, and not the bigger issues. So we still see that. So in right now, just across the bay from me in Oakland and Alameda County, there's going to be a recall effort for the district attorney. I think Governor Newsom is about to be hit with the 3rd recall attempt, which is, it's also so, just getting into budget again, it's so many millions of dollars that these elections cost. And I realize I am talking about my previous role, which was with the pre-K to 12th grade district, but the school district had to pay the cost of the recall election, which is taking money right away from students. It was, I don't know, $7 million, some high figure, and all we had to do was wait another year and a half and elect somebody else. So that's the political danger I see in California. There's nothing illegal about it. It just feels very damaging.
I'm going to give one other piece. The bigger fear I have politically is all this dark money that's out there for politics.
So
What
much
about if
money.
that dark money starts going to the educational boards? What prevents them from doing it, right? Nothing prevents them from doing it. I know we're recording, I'm not trying to give them their playbook, but what prevents them
Nothing.
from going to the boards and trying to influence whether they're electeds or they're appointeds? We're there for 8 years. I mean, that's a lot of influence. Somebody comes to me, I've got 7.5 more years on this board. Not that I'm going to be influenced by that, but what prevents somebody else from doing it? That's a bigger fear I have across the nation.
Yeah.
All right, so let's open it up. Does anybody have any questions?
So my name is Tim Shively. I'm the president of the Faculty Association at Foothill De Anza Community College District, kind of in your neighborhood. And over the last 2.5 years, I'd say, we have had both colleges' presidents, I don't know what verb I should have used, removed. One was removed, one resigned. A new chancellor, new vice chancellor of HR. I mean, a lot of stuff and a lot of time. And so some of that is attributed to the new chancellor. He's getting some things done in the district. But a lot of it was a long time coming. like years, I would try to get the board to intervene in things that were really about the governance of the colleges, which they were, not likely to do. And I tried everything. I would meet with the board members. I would organize speakers for board meetings. I would excoriate them in our newsletter. And I kind of ran out of strategies at a certain point. And so my question to you is, how do you get the ear of a board member to do crisis intervention before it mushrooms into something like where there's a big public stink and president is removed and files lawsuits and this sort of thing?
I mean, I think it depends on the member. Most are pretty accessible for a conversation, but you got to remember the flip side of that, which is I get a lot of, we tried to talk to the administration, so we could just equate this to a board member, and they wouldn't listen to me because they didn't do what you wanted them to do. And I'm sure in your case, maybe it was the right thing to do and they wouldn't do it. And I'd say, wait, did they not listen to you or did they not agree with you? Because, well, no, yeah, we met 20 times for an hour every time. I said, well, it sounds like they listened to you, but that's two very different things. And there are a lot of times where individual interest groups have something that, to them, it's human nature. I'm a big believer, it's tough to overcome human nature, that this is all that matters to me. And therefore, it should be all that matters to you, and it should be the only issue you make this decision based on. And it's almost never, ever, 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 ever that the case. And so they should be accessible, and I would just reach out for individual meetings because that's the most effective, and especially individual one-on-one, as opposed to I want to meet with all of the board members. Just knock them out one at a time. And as I say, make your argument, say your piece, do it eloquently and persuasively, and then if they don't go with you, that's democracy. There's probably a reason.
I was going to say, you might, and this is now, no way am I trying to be snarky about it, but we probably need to elect other trustees.
Yeah, that's your only recourse. Yeah.
Michael Seville, I'm the general manager of the California Faculty Association. We just went through the strikes and everything that we had in December and January, in strong partnership with my sister and the Teamsters, who's in the room as well. And I don't see Joseph, who's the chief negotiator for the CSUs, in here, so I can be a little more frank, I guess. But the CSU system is appointed, and it's one of the largest public university systems in the country, 23 campuses, and that's a big problem. And we've actually talked to the legislature about trying to change and implement changes to how trustees are appointed. We think they should be elected. No appetite from the legislature to take on the governor because the governor gets to appoint large donors.
Yeah.
And there's a real firewall in the CSU system. We reached out constantly to trustees, never got meetings. A new chancellor just come in, refused to meet with us. And that really created this situation in which we had to go on one of the largest system-wide strikes in higher education in the United States. My question is, though, as a trustee, what is the level of understanding and engagement you have with the administration around the budget, and particularly around reserves? I mean, the CSU is sitting on billions and billions of dollars of reserves. And when you go into bargaining, we have economists talking about the health of the system, and they have all this money. There's a tight budget year in California this year, projected deficits. So what is the level of engagement that trustees have around digging in on budgets and figuring out what the real capacity is of the system?
I have a strong opinion on this, so you guys might
Go
want to go
ahead.
first
No,
if you want to go
go
first.
ahead.
No, go ahead.
I may not be saying what you want to hear, but in terms of engagement in the budget, it depends on the trustee. Your system in California is crazy. University of Michigan is the only board that has more than one campus. We have Flint and Dearborn as well as Ann Arbor. And I always contend you can't serve two masters. And so when we're building a budget, what's good for Flint may not be good for Ann Arbor and Dearborn, etc., but we have to make a decision, and that's unhealthy. There should be a separate board for every institution, I believe. But the one thing you mentioned was reserves, and do you mean by reserves, you mean endowment?
Yes and no. I mean, they're held largely, they're restricted, they're unrestricted.
Right.
Yeah, so
Right.
We call them reserves, we don't call them endowment. I generally associate that with private universities, but
Yeah,
I'm not.
but we get that charge a lot. And so again, this is maybe a bit of a segue, but every dollar of the endowment gets used for the benefit of the budget. And we at the University of Michigan, over time, mostly in the most recent decades, have built a relatively large endowment, not per student, but just in real size. Whether it be in world wars or global pandemics, the Board of Regents never dipped into the corpus to pay current obligations. That is, again, robbing the future for the present. And when different unions say, you could just take a fraction of your $18 billion principal and cover this this contract cost. Well, great, that just means we have less money to use in the future for that, because every dollar that sits in principal kicks off interest that goes straight into the general fund for that year. And so I contend that that is not an appropriate place to pay for current obligations. The reason why we have an $18 billion endowment, probably $20 billion now, and use every penny that it kicks off every year. Now it kicks off more for our budget every year than the state gives us, well over $400 million. The reason why we have an $18 billion endowment is because 10 years ago, when they had a little hole in their budget, they didn't take $500 million out of it to cover that hole and make their life easier that day. So that's kind of my soapbox on using endowment principle to cover short-term.
So our first budget that I participated in was last year, and literally saw stuff in April, June, we're voting on it. You mentioned the June thing, and with us it goes by what the legislature gives us. They have their set amount. I think it's going to be about 2.5% this year that they're going to give all the universities, and roughly. So as we look at that money, we have to be conscious of that. Similar thing with endowment. We don't have the endowment level that University of Michigan has, but we have to be careful with that because of what that means for the future too. And reserves, where we do have some reserve money, money that didn't get spent for a program or not all that got spent, things like that. That's what I consider the true reserve piece. We have at Central Michigan, we actually go back and we looked at that, what we had out of last year's the year before's budget, what we had in reserve that we can use for other things. I'll use an example. Food insecurity on campuses is horrible. College kids.
Yep.
We have a student food pantry. There's no budget money that goes to that. And one of the things, I was shocked when I heard that, so one of the things every time I go to that campus, I visit the food pantry. My wife says, "Why are we going to the food pantry?" I said, "Because, at one point my parents needed to borrow, that food insecurity happened in their life at some point. So my father said, you give to others. So, we don't get compensated. Every mile I drive to go to Mount Pleasant goes back to that food pantry. Because I get reimbursed mileage. So it goes back to them. And we as trustees have, helped do that. Well, guess what? Out of our reserve, there was a little bit of money that we were able to send some money over to the food pantry, first time ever. I mean, that's the kind of stuff where when there's true reserve, can you help out there, or can you go fix this or whatever? That's how we've done it with budget.
So I hear you. This is one of our major areas of disagreement at City College. How much money should be in the reserve? How much money should be in this other fund that can't get touched? All these pockets of money. And I really, some of it I really feel is part of the austerity agenda. You just got to save your money. And so I have become very familiar in the relatively short time I've been a trustee with the concept that even though state law says colleges, at least community colleges, I don't know about the CSUs, must have a minimum reserve of 5%. But we are getting scolded for not having 17%, because the recommendation, not the law, the recommendation is a 2-month reserve operating. And I would say that in times of, in better times, put the money away. In times when we are at risk, right now, because there were faculty members who were laid off, and we as board members tried to get them back, they're not back, get a little more into the weeds of the law in California. If there are any full-time faculty members still on the recall list, tenured faculty members, you can't hire part-timers at all in that department. So we have waiting lists of students who cannot get into classes because we don't have faculty. We could, if we either got the 20 or so laid off faculty members back, it's going to be fewer now, they've gone somewhere else, or could hire part-timers, and it would be money well spent. But this drive to fully fund the Retiree Health Trust Fund and keep the reserves higher than are necessary is holding us back. And then it also goes back to why is funding so terrible for public education in San Francisco? Until we overturn Prop 13, the fight's on our hands, right?
And I fear we didn't totally answer your question. It depends. I think a system that has 20-some campuses with a single board, and you say we really need X to happen at this one school, well, I'm going to crash a budget because that thing didn't happen at one school. It's so massive, you kind of have to always vote yes. And that's unfortunate. At ours, even though we have 3 campuses, it's much easier. We had, for the first time, I was only on the board a couple of years at this point, we had the majority of the board wanted something which was a rounding error in our budget invested in Flint, who just went through the water crisis. It was $10 million to support. And the president at that time was like, no, we're not doing any of it. And for the first time that we could find in our history books, we voted no on a budget in a public meeting. And said, we're not passing it unless you put this $10 million there of a $12 billion budget. So the board can go to the administration if they have the votes and say, this is a priority of us and we want it done.
We actually did some of that, where we had a priority about how much should go. It was the trust fund for the retiree health benefits. Let's not give, it would be great to pay off the whole mortgage now. It's the kind of analogy, but we can't. So let's make sure that we can cover the costs that we have. And because of course the link to not having having students on waiting lists is that we can't grow our enrollment to the extent we need to, and we're desperate to grow enrollment.
Yeah, Jennifer Schnowski, AFT Local 1603. I'm also a school board member, and I want to thank all of you because I think you really articulated why it's so important to have working people and labor leaders on boards, so thank you all. I'm wondering how you manage things like, I think you called them a limousine Democrat. When in closed session things happen with your colleagues that indicate pretty anti-labor or at least non-pro-labor positions, and then in public different things are sort of presented. How have you managed things like that?
With varying degrees of success, I'd say. I mean, trying to keep the dialogue open, right? And, how can we work together? We are currently a board that has mostly 4-3 votes.
Wow.
And that's very difficult. Yeah. It is very difficult. And not all the votes, I will say. And so, I would certainly be reluctant to call out, publicly call out my colleagues, any colleagues who I feel have a different opinion behind closed doors, but just continuing to be as convincing as we can. I don't know, use all our efforts of persuasion and also show hopefully other people come forward and support.
Yeah, I think it's two things. One is give them data, give them information, give them arguments that they can make in that room. Because, you know, a lot of them are politicians, and they'll say one thing, you know, to a group to just appease them in the moment, and then go back and they'll, I hope, do what they actually think is best in, as you say, kind of the smoke-filled room. But especially with us, I always say, okay, if I'm going to demand 10 million go to Flint or crash this budget, it's on me to come up with that 10 million. I have to get deep enough in the budget to say, okay, here's where we can find it. Because the budget's balanced without the 10 million, so I have to keep it balanced with the 10 million. And, you know, we have a million things we're looking at. And so I always put it back on the labor group that I'm speaking to, say, okay, I'll give you the information to pull apart, but then come back with a solution to me. Give me the information and give me the solution to make the trade in the room in a budget issue. If not, it's really hard on a massive budget to just say, oh, give them 2% more or spend 10 million in Flint. That's tough. That's unfair to the administration to say something like that. So you have to give them the info, give them the solution, and then because I suspect they would love to do it, but they don't feel they can because it's irresponsible. And if you give them the solution, then it gets done.
I've always said when you negotiate a contract, if both sides aren't equally dissatisfied, you haven't done it right. So that's been my 40 years of experience doing that. So similar with trustees, look, we're not all in agreement on everything, but how do we find compromise? How do we find solution? Using your word, and I think, you know, we all want the right things. We all want to do the right things, but how do we get there? Everybody is entitled to their own opinion, but where's the majority? And how do we take that minority to the majority side? Because that's what it's really about. And you wouldn't know. Here's the other important part. When we walk out of our executive session, you're not going to know that who disagreed and what we disagreed on. And that's the important part too, for the betterment of the university. It's not about my opinion. It's not about any trustee's opinion. It's about what's best for the university.
But it's so true, the solutions, to be solution-oriented, it's pretty easy to admire problems, but to come to the solutions is the hard work, yeah.
Another question?
My name is Ella Gonzalez, and I'm from California. I'm the president of the Council of Classified Employees, and one of the things that happens to us when we're at the bargaining table is that our district tells us, oh, so like we want to do stuff for you, but the board, you know, like
Oh yeah.
and so then I go talk to the board president, like other boards, and I'm like, hey, like you guys don't want us to have professional development? That's crazy because we know Title IX, like all this stuff, right, is coming up, and then they're like, what? That's the first time I've heard about it, right? So
Usually
that's something that happens to us. But then at board meetings, some of our management get up and present things like, we're up in enrollment by 3%, but then they leave the fact out that they're talking about like a certain year, like we're really not, you know, so a lot of times our role has been to be like the truth tellers, which we're always like, look, this is from the state, you guys, your management reported to the state that we're down in enrollment. So why are we reporting to the public that we're up in enrollment? So it's not like a total lie, but it's very like not transparent, right? Because if you've been like from last spring or from, you know, but anyway, so I just like, how do you trust that your management is telling you the truth, or like as board members, and also that things are, you know, filtered up or concerns are up, and then especially when it was in accreditation as a kind of a recommendation that the board shouldn't be operational, right? And that came from, I think it was a Senate, faculty Senate meeting where someone from accreditation was in there, but then it just so happened that they had invited a board member and somebody asked about races, right? And so then that kind of, anyway, all of that, I just feel like maybe it's just our district, but I don't know if it's just like, how do we like make sure that everyone's like being a truth teller so we can actually get things done for our students and actually do enrollment management. Like we're supposed to be Great Lake and all of that stuff.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. Classified staff often gets overlooked, so I'm really glad you're here and that you spoke. And I think what you're doing is the checking in to check on people's truths. We actually heard that a number of times about negotiations with both the faculty and the classified union. In closed session, we would discuss what should happen in bargaining, and then I would hear from the president of the classified union. We were told that the board didn't give any advice. We were told that you said those are things we heard. So then that means that we have to go back and say, let's have this conversation again. This is what we said to do. And so it's tried but true. I don't know. It's only successful if there's no communication. So that's why these conversations with the unions are so important. So we know what's actually going on. We did eventually, the president of our board of trustees started requesting that the chancellor write down what we had said as instructions, just to make sure we had a record of it.
Have your own person create data and don't embellish it, don't spin it. I've been spun by both sides, labor and you just lose instant credibility. And on the flip side, if you're the one that gives good data with good definitions and you expose the administration for spinning it or leaving out a definition that creates the number, you get instant credibility and then they lose credibility with the board. So just create your own data and just have it be totally credible. A good example of what we just had, we're talking about the faculty, tenure track faculty in Flint organizing. The administration came to us and said, this is what it's going to cost us, if this happens. And they just gave the number. And I was like, wait a second, what's that based on? Well, it's just based on a 7% per year, for example, salary increase. I'm like, well, that's pretty important detail that you just gave me. Yes, we've had some 7% in the last 12 to 24 months, but historically it's more like a 3%. And so the fact that you didn't tell me that that's what you based your number off of, you lose credibility really, really fast if you try to screw the numbers.
Facts and sources,
Yeah.
get them, bring them forward, and then I'm gonna close my comment with, as chair of the board and a union guy, I'm salivating right now for when that administration blames the board. I'm looking forward to that conversation. That's one I've had most of my life. I look forward to that kind of conversation. But I think there's a perspective too. They understand we're not going to blame, because I've seen examples of stuff where we push back on stuff and found accurate stuff. So, but again, it's when you bring us accurate information, please make sure that we know what that is and feed us the accurate stuff.
So unfortunately, we're out of time, but please join me in thanking our